ideas and find truth. They formed from 1,000 different blocks in 1,000 different shapes. So making sense of the information takes an army and an age. And because every client holds their data differently, behind their own walls, every client solution demands a bespoke approach. And every day our tasks grow more complex. But what if we turned it upside down? And instead of innovating alone, we work together with leaders in technology to create a new standard for the data we use that ensures its completeness and accuracy. We think that could break down the walls. It's been done before to bring down the high walls of banking and open up healthcare. And like wealth and health, unleashing the potential of corporate data will benefit us all. A common data model that frees us and allows us to more easily build smart solutions that fit all of our clients, creating an openness to scrutiny and clarity, creating secure marketplaces and healthy competition across the industry, raising quality levels, cutting cost, affording wasted effort, whilst allowing new entrants in to innovate, freeing our brightest minds to rise above the rubble and complexity, and instead shape tomorrow. Engine B, powering a new open age of professional services.
Afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here on, I know, what is the last leg of a 3-day amazing CogX, and hopefully that video gave you some clue as to why you're in the room. The title may also have given it away. I want to introduce two fantastic contributors to this conversation. Ulrich Homann from Microsoft, immediately next to me, and by way of introduction, titles matter, I think, sometimes, because they give you a sense of the environment in which people live and work, and Ulrich is a distinguished architect at Microsoft. He'll tell you what that means later. But essentially, and I asked both Shamus and Ulrich earlier, what does your future look like for you? And in a post-AI adopted world, and what's your role in that? And Ulrich described it as creating the framework in which that AI enabled society operates through the cloud. So I think that gives us a fair idea of, you probably have a busy inbox.
Well, a little bit, yes.
A little bit, yeah. Now, next to Ulrich, we have Shamus Ray. Shamus is KPMG. Has a brilliant job title, Digital Disruption, which you can tell us all about in a moment, because this is at the core of that. We're also the CEO of Engine B, which is a video you just watched there that describes a little bit of that. And I did think at the end of the afternoon, after 3 days, you probably need some entertaining. So tell me something interesting, I asked Shamus, and he just told me some other stuff that was less interesting, until he got to the point of the fact that he is going to be establishing a off-grid community in northern Spain, of which you can ask him about later when you meet the speakers. That's not why we're here. What we are here to talk about is the impact of the opportunity that might arise from maximising data and professional services, whether that be law or accountancy or into insurance and others. And just to give you a sense, a little bit of what we're talking about in professional services, I think it's worth at least just reminding ourselves of what that encompasses. The professional services is 11% of the UK's GVA, that's about 186 billion. 13% of our UK employment sits within professional services, that's across all of that, that's about 4.6 million jobs. It's a major major exporter, so roughly about 66 billion in exports, and it underpins not just the two sectors that we've just mentioned of accountancy and law, but actually across professional services, the way in which that operates as a basis for all the other verticals across the economy is a figure that I probably couldn't calculate very quickly, but needless to say, it is quite significant. But what we're going to talk about here is not just about how we maximize the potential for data in the space of the big boys. When we talk about professional services, you'll often think about the big four, you might think about the magic circle, but actually the majority of both in accountancy and law, the majority of actual industry participants are SMEs, right? So there's a great breadth of, and variety within this sector. So that just gives you a little bit of the flavor of what we're talking about here. But let's just go back to some basic stuff. Tell me, Uli, you guys have been working with SAP and Adobe on an open data initiative. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is, its objectives, and who you're designing that for? What is your real intent? What's the underpinning assumptions and outcomes that you're looking for?
So when you look at companies, mostly the big ones, obviously, but also lots of small ones, they have a number of systems, Adobe being one, SAP being another one. They're using Microsoft technology and others, obviously. But when they are trying to bring business processes to work from one system to the next, they have to extract the data, transform the data, put it from one system to the next, maybe using API calls if they're lucky. If they're not that lucky and the systems are older, they have to go after databases and other things. So a lot of time and money is wasted effectively taking data from one environment, putting it through a transformation and make it usable in another environment. And Open Data Interchange is a joint initiative between Microsoft, SAP and Adobe to effectively, at least between these three systems, but obviously going after other systems down the line, making it so that you can design a business process that fits in the right place and start, let's say, in Adobe at their marketing experience management system, ending up in SAP from a business process perspective, and then run big scale analytics on Azure, something like that, without you having to do any transformation, without you having to taking data extracts and figuring out what they mean and map it to the meaning in one or the other system. So that's really effectively the Open Data Interchange. And the video does actually a great job visualizing these little parts. And what we're really looking at is how do we make these parts, on the outside at least, look the same. So that if you're talking about a customer, it is always a customer in the context of Adobe or context of SAP or the context of Microsoft. It doesn't really matter. And obviously this is open, so once we have more flesh to the bone, this will be an initiative where we will invite other players and other people to participate as well.
Well, that's really interesting. Shamus, the work that you're doing in the accountancy industry looks and feels a bit like an application of exactly this. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? And is it ostensibly the reapplication of open banking, which is a B2C focused enterprise, into a corporate layer of B2B?
Right, yeah. So we're working in accounting first, and then we'll do legal. But it's exactly that. If you think about the analogy of open banking, we want to do open banking equivalent for corporate data. So that actually allows large organizations or medium-sized organizations to access lots of startups. And the startups don't have to try and get access to individual client systems. They can just go to let's call it an API, and they can get the data in a predictable format. So it's exactly, that's the analogy. And we're working not just on the financial systems, but we're doing structured and unstructured data. So we'll be picking up contracts from contracts databases, invoices, etc., or employment contracts. So startups can then go, actually, I want to do a startup which is going to look at lease contracts, right? And use AI on lease contracts. But now they can actually get access to that and set up a system in a predictable way. So it's absolutely doing that, and we're absolutely going to do it in conjunction with the Open Data Initiative for Microsoft as well. So actually, it'll be open-sourced common data models, and it'll be very clear about how people can access the data as required. So.
Can I be really cheeky? And so, disclosure first, I used to work for the CMA, Competition Markets Authority, which you already knew. Yeah. If people are being slightly cautious, they'd say, is this just a way of kicking the competition concerns down the road a little bit?
So, it's a good question, an unfortunate question, but anyway. No, it's fair. So we actually started this project over 2 years ago, and it was a global project within KPMG, and you'll be amused to know that the project was initially called Project Not Kodak, right? So it was trying to do exactly what it says on the tin, right? Which is like, actually, accountancy and legal are going to digitize. How do we keep ourselves in front of that? And then when we looked at the blockers for getting that to happen, and blockers in terms of the innovation from all the startups and why the market's so closed, we came down to the actual getting access to client data in a visible and open way is restricting innovation, and that's why we did it. So we actually had to go to the Competition and Markets Authority and have that conversation. So yeah, they've looked at what we're trying to do, and we're doing it in an open way with all the industry leaders. It's that all the accounting firms you've ever heard of are involved, and we're working with Microsoft, but we're creating a separate entity which won't be owned by one accountancy firm either. So Engine B will be a fresh entity as well.
So I mean, I mentioned earlier that so much of the professional services sector is made up of these smaller players, both in the Open Data Initiative and in Engine B. It seems to me that there is a degree of reliance and of being able to at least standardize internal data to be able to then be able to play in this sort of metadata layer. Tell me a little bit about how you foresee the SME sector being able to be an active part, or is this really designed for those who have got the big existing data blocks?
So the way it works is you will get an open source specification of how you have to model your data. And by the way, SAP has their own data model, Adobe has their own data model, we have our own data model. That's not going to change. So we don't expect internal systems to change necessarily. But what is going to change is how do you present it to the outside? So that if I'm a startup, or if I'm KPMG, or if I'm PwC, whoever that wants to write an AI algorithm that does something intelligent, today I have to go and maybe I model my own data model, and then I have to get the data into that format. With a common format that's understood by enough parties, it becomes interesting to build against that model, which means you can focus on your algorithm and not focus on the data interchange. And that means anybody who is doing this today, I mean, we have a tool in our Power Platform, which is what we call a low-code, no-code scenario, where you effectively use Excel-like graphics to do a transform. And that those Excel-like graphics will understand this common data format. So you effectively say, okay, I have a format on this side, my source side, but you can pick, you don't have to, but you can pick the open format to say, I want the data to transform from X to Y, so that, let's say, some of the startups we saw here before could actually work on that data, and they don't have to worry about, oh, this data speaks Swahili and I speak English. So effectively try to get to English as a common language, understanding, so that you can focus on value add rather than on transforming data back and forth.
So the thing to remember is, and Sophia really hinted at this, this at the moment is a $1.2 trillion marketplace globally, and by 2023 it's expected to be $2.2 trillion, right? So this is a massive, massive marketplace, and it's a long tail of medium-sized and small organizations. So, the big four might have 1 million people, and they may do 100 billion of revenue, but actually the future is going to be in the long tail and the startups coming in rather than anything else. So we have to build it for the whole long tail. And in fact, the Competition and Markets Authority also told us we have to do that, but I mean, in a nice way.
They nudged you, it's called.
They nudged us in a nice way.
Yeah, a bit of a nudge. So actually that's really interesting, isn't it? Which is, if that's where the transformation can take place, so if I say 5 years out, let's imagine that this has been really successful and that we've managed to somehow supercharge that sort of long tail into some sort of real disruptive, challenging force to the rest of the market. What does 5 years out look like for both of you in, let's just say, any of the professional services, law or accountancy? Yeah. We'll come on to law in a moment in detail.
Well, for me, I'm going to be an Engine B, right? So it's going to be great. But we're working with, in the UK, well, this is a global project, but we're working in the UK with Imperial on the accounting side and Birmingham on the legal side. And the research we're doing there is about how do we activate the ecosystems of startups into using Engine B and the common data models defined by Microsoft and the industry and startups. So I'm looking and going, can we have a whole bunch of new innovation and technology coming into the industry? The answer's got to be yes. Can it be done in a way where data can be exchanged between startups so you can start having a kind of proper portfolio of systems which can communicate with each other? Absolutely. And I think that's needed as much in law, by the way, as it is in accounting. I think too many small legal startups not talking to each other from a technical point of view is difficult. But our own research says that 69% of audit can be automated, right, in the next 5 years. And when we look at legal firms, the top legal firms, the couple we've looked at, it's 60%, right? So I see, people in this room should be out doing innovative startups and kind of working on that, forcing that digitization forward, I think.
Well, the way I look at this is, we're at Cognition X, right? So the big problem that AI has is access to data. If you don't have access to the right data, you won't make great algorithms, and they don't learn from the data and keep improving. So part of what I look at when I look at Engine X is to really fuel the AI models that you can effectively bring to bear to the audit, legal, and other professional services. And when I look at this is, one of the questions, I'm not an auditor, I have no idea, but one of the things I always keep asking, so why does an audit happen at a certain point in time? Why do we do snapshots? With systems like this, we can actually now go to continuous audit. I can actually today ask for an audit and get it. Today, that's impossible for firms of any size. And so that's just one innovation that we can do. And obviously, allowing AI to really discover anomalies before they even really become visible is, for me, another really big advantage. And competition. At the end of the day, the Big Four are the Big Four for a reason. They're doing a great job, but I'm sure there are lots of people out there that could add value to the conversations around the data that are being produced, generated, and utilized in those audits and other scenarios.
Shamus, you mentioned that some of this is transferable to the world of law, so we've talked a little bit about the Big Four, but obviously we have, again, a long tail of small law firms, but then a cohort at the top of the pecking order. Let's talk a little bit about the applicability of this in terms of the data opportunity that arises, but also, does one offer a greater opportunity than the other, accountancy versus law, or are they essentially going to blend over the next 10 years into a central...
So the big accounting firms are going into law, right? So the biggest law firm in the world is now EY. Good luck to them, really. No, but so, and I think a lot of the work that it's a kind of continuum between accounting and legal. People think it's very different, but actually it's a continuum. But actually, if you look at the total size of the market, as I said, 1.2 trillion today, 2/3 of that is legal, right? And 1/3 is accounting. So I think the opportunity is in legal. But if we get the accountants to drive this early, then when they're doing the audits, they'll be putting this standard into the clients, right? And then that will open it up to legal as well. So it's a kind of route in, it's to capture the market, if that makes sense.
Is that because actually it's easier to get the clients to agree? Because some of this, actually, one thing that we haven't touched on is as much as this is sitting amongst the organisations that have the data, actually much of the debate that takes place on data rights is really focused around individual data rights. But there's a B2B version of this, right? Whose data is sitting in there in the first place, and how do you culturally get your clients to say, that's fine? How does that work, both in Engine B and the broader ODI piece? So
let me go first, I'll pass over to Uli. So the reality is the audit firms have been making an assumption that they can take all the client data, anonymize it, and use it elsewhere, right? And that's how the T's and C's currently exist in audit. You may be surprised to hear. But last year, 30% of the large organizations changed those T's and C's and said, actually, you can't take all our data. That's of some value, right? And Engine B is on the assumption that now is going to be, data is going to be controlled by the client. It's just like personal data is becoming more important. You want to control who's got it, what access they're going to have, how they're going to use it, and what they're going to do with it when they're finished. That's exactly what we're trying to do with Engine B for corporate data. But it's going to change who owns that data and who's trying to extract value from that data and give it back to the client. So.
That sounds like a huge task. Really, tell me a little bit about how that plays out in the Open Data Initiative.
Well, so Microsoft is just a platform provider. Our perspective is that your data is your data, and we have no interest in it, and we don't touch it. We just secure it and make sure that nobody else touches it. And we will give you the tools to effectively provide those rights that Shamus talked about to people that you either trust or that you want to do business with, depending on what your desire is. And so that doesn't change with open data interchange, because that's just another tool set on the platform where you can then say, okay, this data, I'm good at giving it into the Engine B environment. It's still my data, but I now give, let's say, EY access to it because they showed me some valuable AI algorithm that really helps me with whatever anomaly A or B or C. So from our perspective, we are just hosting the data, making it accessible, and we're building open tool sets around it so that it can become more valuable to you as a customer, not necessarily to EY, KPMG, whoever the partner is that you're partnering with.
So I've asked Shamus the cheeky question for you. Cheeky question for you, which is that all sounds really altruistic and lovely and fluffy and warm and great. But actually, what's really in it for Microsoft?
It's actually very, very simple. For me, there are three things. One, the relationships. I have a kaput. My finger is kaput.
I'm being really mean.
It's kind of, it's like, it's hard to do, right? So the first one is we value our relationship with the Big Four. We are working great with them, and of course with lots of other people as well. And that's an important piece because we drive a lot of business together, so that makes a lot of sense to us. The other piece is, like with all the other open standards and open source that's happening, the more you create in terms of openness, the more value you create and the bigger the marketplace gets. Because right now the market is segmented because people can't access to the data. Once you open it up, the market opens up, and if you are able to capture enough interest onto your platform, the platform wins, and therefore you make effectively money. And so Microsoft Cloud is the hosting environment, and therefore we're partnering with Engine B and others to effectively make sure that the right tooling, the right openness is there to create this bigger marketplace, and then ultimately we might make money of hosting data, hosting applications, and providing services to people that want to build great applications.
So my follow-up cheeky question to that is tying the two cheeky questions together. So there's a theme to this, which is, isn't that just moving the competition concern somewhere upstream? The holding the data no longer here, but actually the provision of the ability to harvest the data reservoir or the metadata layer through the platform that you provide.
So first of all, this is truly open, meaning if people say to me, well, we don't like Azure, we would like something else, you can do that. It is absolutely possible. It's not something we will help you with, but it's certainly something that is absolutely feasible. It's just that the other cloud provider, whoever that might be, would have to sign up and support the same standards and the same models. There is a couple of other cloud providers, which we will acknowledge.
Other big names are available in this space, is what you're saying.
They are, which is a good thing, by the way.
Yeah,
it's awesome.
Competition's a very good thing. Yeah, we all agree with that. So just thinking about the comparison between accountancy and legal and the other markets in which Open Data Initiative might play, tell us a little bit how that compares in terms of plausible take-up, adoption, and just the size of that opportunity from your perspective. And then, Shamus, I'd really love to hear a little bit about what you were able to learn from those other industries, those other verticals, about how then we create that space for adoption. Because actually, as much as this is a plausible, viable route to maximizing the potential in professional services, it really isn't going to work unless we have some degree of adoption.
I mean, so Microsoft has been on this open data initiative for a while, starting in our Microsoft Business Applications area, which is called Dynamics 365 as a product. And we've been effectively publishing our data models that we're using in our products itself, because again, ISVs and other partners are critical to the success of business applications, and we can't and won't build everything that people might want. And just to give an idea, we've added a couple of domains in partnership with other customers and ISVs, for example, in the automotive domain, which is focused on dealer management. Not something that Microsoft owns. It's a common data model. We published it. It's out there. And now solution developers can now effectively work on dealers' management solutions for the automotive industry. using this common format. I'm not a spreadsheet person, so I have no idea what the market size is. I'm sure Shamus has lots of numbers.
A numbers man, are you?
But it is something that we are seeing taking hold of everywhere because customers realize they're wasting a lot of time and money, and they're not getting fintechs or biotechs or others to work with them as fast and as innovative as they could because the data is different every time. And so a lot of time is being wasted at the end of the day to create this data that they can operate on. And so having an open model and open way of doing it is for me, opening up beyond what I can really think about. 2.2 trillion sounds great already, but I have no idea what that number really is.
Yeah, so I think so we looked back at previous computational model initiatives, and there have been some in accounting as well. Actually, unless you love them and nurture them and keep them alive and keep both sides, right? So from the service providers and the users, the kind of the big clients who have it integrated in their systems, unless you keep that alive, then it dies over time, right? So and so we wouldn't do this. I don't want to play to Uli's ego, but we wouldn't do this if it wasn't going to fold into something like the ODI initiative, right? So it's part of a global initiative. It's open. And it's got to be owned by the industry and by everybody in the industry and kept alive and loved and cared for.
So let's imagine a future where we've got all this open data sitting around usefully waiting for experimentation and machine learning tools. What is for those who are less familiar with this space, what is the current pipeline of those doing research of using AI machine learning tools in accountancy and law? What does that look and feel like? Is there already populated field of people working in this space?
Yeah, so we did an analysis of startups around the world, right? And we looked for the letters AI in there. And there are 10,000 startups claiming to be in professional services doing AI.
Claiming.
And actually that's the main word here, right? So there's a lot of noise out there, and there's a lot of stuff which just shouldn't exist, if I'm being honest. There's some really good universities doing research. So UCL is doing some work around banking regulatory reporting, not that exciting. We're working with Imperial, as I said, on accounting, Birmingham on legal tech. But also that you look at what's going on in Singapore, right? And actually, I passionately believe if we can get this going, we're starting in the UK, then we're going to go to the US. But if we can get this going in the UK, can we get legal tech back from Singapore to the UK? It's got to be one of our ambitions. And it's got to be also, I hate to say it, done outside of London, right? So let's get AI by the industry back into the UK for legal and accounting. And then we're going to go to New York next. So.
I think one of the things that we've certainly seen at Law Society through our Law Tech Adoption Report is that adoption remains really slow, but it's a really nascent but experimental market. And I think in law, and I think exactly the same, it can be replicated in accountancy, is the mid to longer term trajectory is one where we see real growth in that startup community. And I think we would agree that actually if you're going to do law tech, you ought to do it here in the UK. But I will, on that note, give you both one moment to say a few closing remarks. If there was one thing you wanted people in this room to take away with them, a key message or an ask or a call to action in order to make this a reality, what would that be?
Come and get involved, actually, because we can't just have the common data models and the Engine B project defined by a bunch of pale, stale males in a darkened room in the Accounting Association or the Law Society. So we need to have, I hate to say it, so we need to have that engagement with some of the tech startups, people who want to get involved as well, I think.
Well, that would have been my call to action as well. Seriously, let's talk, and get engaged, because if it's not an open initiative, it will fail. If it's not a live or living initiative, it will fail. And so we need all of you guys to effectively work in this space, working with us to make this successful.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And you can join me in working together by saying thank you very much to my panel.
Thank you, guys.